Welcome, and thank you for listening to this record that I have made with one of my oldest friends, the piano. Between us, we have had the pleasure and honor to collaborate with the great instrumentalists and musical masters of our day. The piano, guitar, cello, violin, saxophone, drums, and of course, the human voice.
So this album's called Piano and Friends, and you've got some amazing artists on here. Your friends are quite incredible, quite mind-blowing. And you started the album with a producer called Laurie, who has done a fantastic job with particularly these big band numbers. And you start with Morris Dance.
Yes, well, we started with Laurie Latham, who's done a lot of our records, but he can only do, for his commitments, these ones with these big bands. And the first one is Morris Dance with Trombone Shorty. And Trombone Shorty from New Orleans is probably now, I would guess, the world's greatest lead trombonist. I think I'll say that about him. Wow. Because he really is an extraordinary player. He sort of captures the sound of New Orleans, but with all its history, but with a completely modern take on it.
And the next one we're coming to is the next one produced by Laurie, is Rockin' Lockin'.
Yes, so this, we started off like with this sort of like quite groove that was really sort of got us quite excited. And I was sort of building it up and thinking could we get to do something. And the person that came into my mind was Booker T, and I'm delighted to say that who is, the greatest exponent of groovy organ on earth today.
So for this track, the piano with Ruby Turner, I mean, you wanted to record it here, which is very different from what we've been doing.
This particular song, I mean, it had quite a strong moving resonance for me when I sat down and started playing it, and it just came out one night, because it is about the piano, but it's also about really, all the people we've sort of loved and lost, really, and the piano and those that play it, but somehow the piano keeps playing even when the music keeps playing even when the people have gone. I sat down at the piano and thought of this, it had been my grandmother's piano, then my mother's piano, and then my mother went into a home and I got the piano. And it's how really that you might lose the person, but the music plays on of whatever they are. It's like a metaphor for that. And this particular piano, which I learned on everything, is the piano that influenced this song. And of course, because this whole record is about the piano, it's a bit like going back to the very beginning. Why the piano is the most important thing to me is because I wouldn't be here having this conversation, or wouldn't have the life I had without my friend here.
The piano that we play still hold us together with the songs we made. The piano.
So Do the Boogie, Mousse T.
I always like the idea of working with him because he makes people dance, and he's looking at and directly involved in it. He's in these huge halls with thousands of people putting on the records, or his records, other people's records, getting people dance. Part of the craft of being a musician is being able to make people feel emotion. You want to be able to make them cry, you want to make them feel romantic. You also need to make them feel joy, and you need to be able to make them dance. And maybe getting people to dance is like really one of the first things. And so here is one of the masters of dance.
It was an incredible pleasure to welcome Tom Jones to my studio when you actually recorded, while we recorded him for Forgive Me. I'm
really fortunate because he's sung a couple of songs I've written, we've even written together, but he is like an actor that comes, if you get him in your film, he suddenly makes your film really great. Suddenly the film, it kind of is really wonderful. And he does it effortlessly, but very conscientiously, because he can't sing the song unless he's really becomes part of it.
Please forgive me for what I've done. I sank so low. Now I want you to know. Please forgive me for what I've done. Forgiveness is such sweetness from the rain. Out comes the sun.
Somehow the piano and the lone violin work together. In classical music they work together. There's something that just kind of has a resonance. The title of it was an instrumental piece. I did have words for it at one point. It was called The Worst Man in London. And you can draw your own conclusions about who that person might be.
This is the first time I've ever played with two pianos, and actually the whole day's been really interesting. Starting off, it feels like we've gone from the macro scale with the band and the full recording, and then we've kind of gone down into like the very real, intimate setting of two pianos.
One of the things about the piano and friends, most of them are instrumental, but of course we have to remember that the human voice is also the instrument that we're all given. And it's the first instrument that humanity had. And Gregory Porter first came onto a later programme quite a few years ago, and after that he came on tour with my big band and we wrote a couple of things together. Once you hear his voice, you realise that it's one of the greatest voices of the new age. And you can hear in this two things, I think, both the quietness and the sensitivity of his singing.
Have been brought to your doorstep. They just lie there and they die there. Are you one? Are you real? Mona Lisa? Or just a cold and lonely, lovely work of art?
I was visiting Danny Harrison, and he has his father's, George Harrison's, old studio, and I started playing this strange sound that sounded like that somebody very beautiful on Mars had sent it to us as a treat, and that made me think about the whole track in a different way. So then we had this sound and the piano, and I think one of the things that we've done on this is think, well, who is the very best person that could possibly do this? And that's when David Gilmour came to mind. He agreed to do it, which was wonderful, and we sent it to him. When we both first heard it, how would you describe our reaction?
Oh my God, I mean, it was such an incredible pleasure to hear, but I think the thing about David Gilmour is one of the most recognisable guitar voices in the world.
It's very important with the friends, you want their voices. That's why you've got them, that's why they're friends to the piano. It needs to sound like them, but also the piano bit needs to sound like me. So it's like these two worlds colliding. There's been a lot of popular pianists. Some of the jazz pianists, country pianists are popular pianists. But in the 60s, there were people like Ramsey Lewis, and the other one was Floyd Kramer. And I say they were popular because they actually had pop hits, they had chart hits, playing instrumentals. And Floyd Kramer did the slip note style of piano, which was this. He was impersonating a sort of a pedal steel guitar. Yeah. And I wanted to use that style in something. And so I wrote this, just called it To Whom It May Concern, because I liked that title, I don't know really quite what it meant, and was playing it to you, and we put something down, and then you said, well, I think you could put these words to it. The metre of the words sat perfectly with the song. But then you hear Iona playing the cello and you think, oh, that's fantastic. When she starts to sing with the cello, it's like the cello and her voice all become one.
I am forever lying here awake, waiting for a guiding light to break.
And Rick Wakeman, I think, is really, he's one of the great legends
Totally.
of British keyboard playing. Anyway, we asked him if he'd like to do a boogie, and I found this one by a great 1940s fellow called Freddie Slack. So this track, Rocking the Boogie, we thought, let's give it a try. And we did go in the studio, and then, because it had worked in the studio like that, but without the big band yet, we tried it on our Hootenanny. And I invited Rick on and said, would you like to come and do this as a duet on the Hootenanny, which we were delighted to say he did. Anyway, he came on, Rick Wakeman came onto the Hootenanny. We did Rocking the Boogie in one take there, and it just was electric because it had the big band on it and it was all as one, and it just sounded really great. So we both agreed, didn't we, that it was much better to just use that one than the ones we'd been sort of slaving over in the studio. So it's a one take live moment.
So Jamie Callum, who's an amazing jazz and blues pianist in his own right, I mean, and great singer, to work with him, I mean, it was fantastic. What a pleasure to hear the two of you pretty much with an improvisation.
Yes, I think that, I mean, first of all, like I said, Jamie Callum is absolutely monstrously talented piano player and singer. I'd written a piece based on a Ruben Gonzalez Cuban chord changes. And so he came into the studio one day, and it was great. We had the two pianos next to each other. Sometimes things have to be really rehearsed. And there are no rules in music. That really is the truth of it. And sometimes it's just something happens. And I think that's what happened there. YolanDa Brown is one of the great new jazz people in Britain today. In the last 10 years, before she became more prominent with her television work, she came out with my orchestra. I went to saw her doing shows because she's such a great player. She touches it, and everything she plays, every note, it just gets you going, gets you feeling excited, which is what the gift of a great musician has.
So much energy as well.
So much energy, and so much she has so much positive energy, which I think makes an important difference. And we were thinking about what to do, and you said, I think you should do the Ernest Ranglin song Surfing, and that was a very, very good call, because it comes off as this really great, it was the perfect vehicle for her and I to have a musical conversation. And I think of any of the pieces of music on there, this really is a musical conversation. But again, it's very accessible, and also refers to the music which I've been connected to all my life, which is the ska music of Jamaica. And that always makes me happy to have that music. And I was pleased we put some of my horn players on there, including, of course, Michael Bammy Rose, who was one of those originators from Jamaica. So it's nice to have all of that music featured. In the late 80s, I did a TV show in America called Night Music, which was like a sort of alternative jazz, blues, whatever sort of music show, which was really great. My co-host was David Sanborn in New York, who is, again, one of the most amazing players. he has a great solo career. He's played on lots of other people's records and has a very distinct sound that a lot of modern saxophone players have kind of honed into. He's one of the great originators who lots of people want to copy. I mean, Bach is probably the greatest, for me, one of the greatest composers of all time. And this music, which is really aimed at to encourage a child to learn, did the same for me. I thought, I've just got to figure that out. And it took me a while to figure it out, reading the music and stuff, and just sort of stumbling through it. But once I got it, I thought, this is it. And then I realised, so the first part, I play Bach's tune, and then the second part, I improvise, and we come up with a big band arrangement. And it's just it kind of goes a bit bonkers. But if you can't go a bit bonkers with Bach, what can you do?
And the next, going back to living legends, somebody I admire a lot, who's an incredible technician as a guitarist, as well as beautiful tone and feel, is Joe Bonamassa. And the next track that Laurie's produced is Requiem for Mac.
Also, the thing that's interesting about him is he loves the British blues. So it was interesting working with him because I'd been sort of working it on the opposite way. I'd been listening to all of the early 1930s African-American blues people. So this is like a little requiem piece for Dr. John. I can hear the British blues coming out. And it made me proud to be part of British blues.
Love Letter to Groningen, which actually features, one of my great heroes. I'm probably the world's top classical pianist, Lang Lang.
Yeah, I mean, he is, Lang Lang, as you say, is now the world's leading, really greatest concert pianist. It's called Love Letter to Groningen because I used to go to Groningen and do a show there once a year, which was really wonderful, about the music, breaking borders, about all the people that had with their music had gone across international borders. And when I did these shows there, it was always very cold, but like a Dutch painting with the winter landscapes, with the sort of frozen canals and the snow and the sort of nice cosy little bars with beer and things. So St. Louis Blues is actually the first piece that my Uncle Dave, there in that photograph, showed me when I was about sort of 8 years old, and he would say he played it like this. That's the styling. Then we fast forward to my TV show when one of the greatest jazz legends of all time, Herbie Hancock, appears on the show. So Herbie said, how about St. Louis Blues? I said, well, that really was one of the first things I learned on the piano. And so I'd love to do it. And he does a completely different take, where it goes into somewhere completely different, into a completely different world, and it's just kind of remarkable. Well, of course, it's a very old hymn. I think it goes back to the 19th century. And I thought it was important to get, to make it sort of groove, is you want to get somebody to play the drums on it, who was like kind of coming from a different place. And so one of the great new talents of new British jazz, which there are some great, really amazing talents, is Moses Boyd, who's just a fantastic drummer. So he's playing the drums on it and takes it up a notch into somewhere else. But I think it still retains, I hope it still retains its spirituality, and it's, there's a lot of breath in there, and a lot of feeling in there, but it's kind of understated. Dr. John, over the years became my friend. I used to see him over the years. I had the same rehearsal spot with him in Los Angeles. We used to go into A&M Records and we had the same room. We used to leave little tapes for one another and things. And he turned me on to lots of music I never knew about. People like Lloyd Glenn and a lot of lesser known great piano players. And it was always kind of showed me stuff. He was a great help to me. We are actually playing our piece that we've written to really celebrate Pete Johnson and Albert Ammons, who we both studied. And it's like he'd done it to the point where he was studying being Albert Ammons and I had studied being Pete Johnson. We both kind of like actors and trying to get into the characters a little bit before we went and did it. And without people like Pete Johnson and Albert Ammons, there wouldn't be any of the modern, really, R&B music or anything. You know, it's there, the roots of all that. You've got to keep going back. The word boogie itself goes to them, you know.